have that it's time for us to get started this morning with our Bible class. We'll be in John chapter 11. John chapter 11 as we get started. Before we do that, as always, let's go to God in prayer. Our God and Father in heaven, we are thankful for every day that you give us, but especially, Father, for this day when we can concentrate on studying your word and worshiping you. We ask, Father, now as we go into this class period that we will open our hearts and minds to what is revealed in your word, that we might see those things that would strengthen us, comfort us, and guide us as we live our lives in this world. We ask all these things through your Son, who makes all things possible. Amen. As you look back at John quickly, and I got some things I looked up the other day. Most popular verses, total Bible. What are the top three, you think? Where are they going to be? If you say the book of John, you got it. John 3:16, ranked number 1. Ranking number 2, and in John and overall, is John 1:1. And ranking number 3, overall and in John, is John 14:6. John then finished out, he has the number 13th overall most popular verse in the Bible is number 4 from John, and that's John 1:12. The book of John, people like it, and that's the reason we need to look at it. We're going to talk about it in the sermon this morning. We're going to talk about this is my sword, and we're going to talk about how and what type of Bibles we have and things like that. The book of John is one of those things that would prove it to us and help us if we know what kind of Bible you actually have. And you say, I don't understand that. Hopefully at the end of the sermon, you'll have a very, very broad, basic understanding of a very, very deep and convoluted subject. You'll hear things that'll be like, which one of the Greek texts does it use behind it? Which text family is it from? Textual criticism. Oh, then after that, what was the translational theory that was applied to that textual background? And then after that, well, is it put into a verse by verse or into a paragraph by paragraph form when you print it and read it? I bring that up with John. Why? Using these most popular verses, what have people done with John and using the number 1 there, John 3:16, over and over? That's the only verse in the Bible. This idea of verses, that was put in there by man, and it's a great thing because right now, like I can say, go to John chapter 11, verse 1, which is where we're going to start in a moment, and everyone is able to what? Turn to the same place and be ready to go. Otherwise, I would say turn to page number 1328, go to the second column and the third line. Anybody got a Bible that's got 1328 pages, double columned, and the third line on the second column is John 11:1? I can only think of one that might be close because Neely should have a Bible that's exactly like mine, but I don't know which one she's using. Acts 20. Can you see the problem already? There's Acts 20. Having the chapters and verses is important to us to study from. But what does that also encourage using the John 3:16 thought? Take it out of context. I know this little blurb. John 3:16 is inside of a whole much larger discussion. What does a paragraph allow you to see? It's inserted down there in the middle, one little line of a huge paragraph. And so we're going to talk about that as part of the sermon, but I use it as John. When we're studying John, we need to make sure as we go, yes, chapter and verse, that we don't allow what to happen. Us to think it's, because how many people here have memorized John 11:35? Everybody's looking. Do I know that one? I hope so. Jesus wept. What if I pull that out of context? Jesus was a crying man because John 11:35 says Jesus wept. Yeah, it proves he's human. It shows us he had great humanity. It doesn't mean he was a what, though? A crying man. Because that's a different implication, isn't it? You see, that's how people do when they take and do verses. And so we want to do that. We want to know where John fits in those. Thinking back now, as we've been looking the last couple of weeks, Jesus had much to say about who he is, about healing on the Sabbath, and being the good shepherd. And you see this carry forward, and people did what? As you close John chapter 10, verse 42, because of the miracles and the things that Jesus spoke, what did people do? They believed on him. Did they believe as a blind leap of faith, as you often hear it said? The only blind leap of faith was the blind man having to do what? Go wash his eyes off. Guess what? Somebody just put clay on your eyes. What are you going to have to do no matter what? Wash your eyes. So he was given a choice. Go to the one place I said, take a chance, and maybe your eyes will be healed. That's his only blind leap of faith. But do you think he'd already heard about this man named Jesus in the background? That there was a man in Jerusalem who had the power to heal. And so when someone put clay on his eyes and told him to go wash in this pool and be healed, did he have evidence that it might be worth following the instructions? And therefore, he did not take a blind leap of faith. When you read John 10:42, and these people believed on him, they did not take a what? Blind leap of faith. If anybody says they're taking a blind leap of faith in religion today, don't listen to a word they say to start with. Now, that doesn't mean don't listen to them and don't discuss with them, but don't rely on their judgment. Why? They got no clue. Not a blind leap of faith. There should be evidence. There should be reason behind it. And that's what we want to do. Why do we believe in heaven? Anybody here seen it yet? Shay, you taking the weekend vacation to heaven yet? Not yet? You mean you can't do that? Oh. What address is it at? You see, how can I believe in something you can't see, you can't touch, you can't... How can I believe in that? Because of other evidence. Other evidence. For example, if somebody saw me, though I do not have one in my pocket, so I can't do this, I have a $100 bill and I gave it to Logan, and then I said to Victoria, after church, Victoria, if you'll meet me outside, I'll give you $100. Is there a logical reason for her to meet me outside now? Not now, because I told you clearly I don't. But, if you saw me give one to Logan, then there becomes a reasonable thought that I could get one. There is evidence. If I just told Savannah with none of that, you didn't hear any of this, Savannah, you hadn't seen a thing. Hey, Savannah, meet me outside after church, I'll give you $100. How much chance is there of getting $100? There's a little space in there. There's a chance, but it ain't big. The other case, there was a reasonable reason. When we look at the Bible, and that's what John's trying to set forth. Remember where John started. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He starts with getting us to understand who Jesus is, and then provides the miracles, the signs, and the statements of Jesus that do what? Provide the proof of that very assertion. He doesn't say, there was this guy who I think was God. He just makes the assertion that Jesus is God and then provides what? the evidence that shows that. That's the picture that John's giving us, and that's where we come. I do all of that because in John chapter 11, we're going to get one of the strongest evidences of Jesus being God that you will find in the Bible. John 11, we open it up. Look at say, the first, let's go about 10 verses. We'll see where we get as we read it, because the whole paragraph goes through verse 16. So here it goes, John 11, beginning at verse 1. Now a certain man was sick, named Lazarus, of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary which anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore his sisters sent unto him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. When Jesus heard that, he said, This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So we see a picture. Jesus begins to be even more human than what we've seen. When you look at John in verse 1 of chapter 1 starts with Jesus being who? God. Then he tells us about how God became man. Then he shows us the power of God in this man. You notice he didn't deal anywhere in John with Jesus' childhood. He didn't deal with much of anything else. He just shows us that Jesus started as God, became man, shows us the power of Jesus there. Now he begins to make Jesus even more human. What did Jesus have like you and I have? Friends, right? What does it mean when it says that Jesus loved Martha and her sister, that would be Mary, and Lazarus? Like it says, they were close friends. He cared about regularly. And so we see that picture. Notice one thing here. He is sick. Now, you think about this, it had to be some serious sickness, because does anybody send you a note when someone in your house just gets a common cold? You call your closest friends from out of town or wherever they are and tell them, hey, feeling a little under weather today when you get a sinus headache? What kind of sickness do you contact people that aren't immediately in the house with? When it's serious, right? Usually we would say when you go into the hospital. They didn't have the hospitals, but Lazarus was that kind of sick. This was not a minor illness. But notice Jesus says an important statement at verse 4, and some people would say, oh, look, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Because Jesus said this sickness is not unto death. Yet what do we know is going to be reported in just a few verses? That Lazarus is dead. But Jesus is also trying to get us, and John is recording this post fact. How do I know that? How do I know that John is recording all of this post fact? From verse 2. What does verse 2 tell us? It was that Mary which anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair. When does that actually happen? Turn over to chapter 12 while you're there. Then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus, which had been dead, whom he had raised. They made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table. Then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. How do I know John's recording post? Well, we know that anyway, but even because he in verse 2 says, this is the same Mary that's going to anoint his feet and wipe his feet with her hair, and she doesn't do it until when? Chapter 12. We're in chapter 11. But you see, Jesus had this association with them. We begin to see him as human, and we see Jesus now expressing the idea, to us of what spirituality is all about. Is death really dead? You see, that's what Jesus is saying. This sickness is not unto death. He wasn't referring to the body. What is Lazarus' body about to do? Quit functioning. But Lazarus was not dead. We're going to see that as we go through. Keep that thought in your mind. Jesus lays this forward, and some people say, well, see, Jesus doesn't know what he's talking about. Yes, he did. But it's a much more important and a much broader idea than concentrating just on that physical body that Lazarus happened to be inhabiting. So verse 6, let's pick up. When he had heard, therefore, that he was sick. Now, you think about this. If someone called and said someone really close to you was sick, what do we immediately do? I know when my dad went to the hospital, and one time when mom went to the hospital, they called me at work. I beat mom to the hospital. I beat dad to the hospital. How does that happen? You have concern and you go straight and you don't let anything get in your way. Why? Because you have great concern. Look at Jesus. Jesus heard he was sick. He abode 2 days still in the same place where he was. Was Jesus concerned? Yeah, but Jesus already knew what was going on. But he's showing us something. Sometimes we don't need to what? Overreact is going to be the key word. Jesus did this for multiple reasons. Number one, Lazarus has to physically die for God to be glorified. Number two, how dead does Lazarus have to be? Yeah, we got to get him down to that. He's known to be dead. There's no way this was. Jesus is setting the stage for a miracle that cannot be denied. Because unfortunately, we've seen it in the world. If you're out on the ice and you fall through and you get cold enough, what are they able to do with you when you get to the hospital still? Restore you, bring you back. And a lot of it goes to because the body got so cold that it keeps itself going, but it shut itself down in such a way that it could survive. And then you're able to come back. You can do that for a short period. If you're underwater so long, what happens? You drown, you die, there's no coming back. But there are cases. Well, here is a case Jesus is beginning to lay forth. Yes, we don't need to overreact as part of it. Number two, I need to make sure there is no way anybody can doubt it. Lazarus has to be dead. And that's what he is laying forth. So he stays 2 more days. Then after that, he saith to his disciples, let us go into Judea again. His disciples have a concern. They're going to say unto him, and this is our halfway point, Master, the Jews of late sought to stone thee, and goest thou thither again? Think about that. He had just been there in the last few chapters having the debate with him, and more than once they had actually started to pick up the stones to stone him. If you had that happen every time, let's say you went into the Pig in Summerton, would you go to the Pig in Summerton very often? Every time you walked in, somebody picked up the potatoes and started throwing them at you. How often would you go into the Pig in Summerton? Not very often. If somebody wanted to kill you every time you went to a certain city, you going to go to that city very often? Here's Jesus. Let's go back. His disciples, are you sure? Think about that now as we put the first 8 verses together here. This provides us with importance of Jesus having human relationships. It provides us with not overreacting. It provides us with proof of his divinity again. And it also shows that at times, even though he's God, what does Jesus not do? not interfere. Think about that. And that's important later. Did Jesus heal every person that ever needed healing when he was on the earth? Now, he healed a lot of people, but did he heal all of them? No. Did Paul, who had had the same power later on, did Paul heal every person he ever came in contact with? No. Why not? He didn't even heal himself. Why not? Who's in charge? This is the real question. Who's in charge and makes the decisions on what should happen? The Father. What did Jesus say about Lazarus? Whatever the Father decides. Now, Jesus knew he was going to do something else, but think about that. There's an important concept for us. Sometimes we need to remember we don't control it. You know, now, at the house, I Love Lucy was on yesterday. The time when little Ricky's what was he, 3 years old, going to preschool. Lucy doesn't want to let him out of her sight. She can't stand the idea he might go to preschool. Ricky has to get her and finally get him there, and then she finds out he's a great artist until he gets sick, and then she's got to figure out how to keep him. Do we do that with children today? What happens to those children? Eventually they get what? Yeah, they get free. When they get free, what do they not know how to do? Yeah, you're seeing the results of some of it in some places today. Jesus knew that at times he couldn't interfere. Why? Because God had a plan for the universe. Sometimes that results in random actions that happen to us. We don't always know, the old statement used to be a butterfly flapped its wings in Beijing, and so it rained today in Corner. We don't always know what started something or how it came about. Jesus is showing we can't always interfere. What do we often pray for? And that's the reason I bring this up, and we have to put that in your will when we pray to God. Because how do we often pray? And how do we want it to turn out? How we want it when we want it. What is Jesus showing us right here? Sometimes it's not about you, not about us. We need to remember God has a plan. That's what Jesus is doing. In fact, look how he goes on, beginning at verse 9, and begins to explain it. Jesus answered after they said, "Are you sure you want to go back in Judea and go see Lazarus, even though he's really sick? Are you really sure you want to do this?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours in the day? If any man walk in the day, he stumbleth not, because he seeth the light of this world. But if a man walk in the night, he stumbleth, because there is no light in him. These things said he. And then after that he saith unto them, Our friend Lazarus sleepeth, but I go that I may awake him out of sleep. Then said his disciples, Lord, if he sleep, he shall do well." Now we'll pick up on what Jesus actually meant in a moment, but think about this. Jesus was making a statement that is just a general application. How many days are there or hours are there in a day? Well, he said, are there not 12 hours? 12 hours of light. We know we go by 24 hours, and we have these great things called electric lights, and we can provide light at night. But what happens, think back to what was it, 2011, when the tornadoes went through and the power was out. What time did you get up during that week that the power was out here? Whatever time the sun came up. When did you go to bed? Basically, whenever the sun went down. Why? Because unless you had batteries, a generator, or candles, and a lot of them, what did you have when the sun went down? Darkness. And we know there's not a lot you can do. Anybody ever tried to actually bake in the dark? Even if you could have a wood-fired stove, I'm going to give you that. Try baking in the dark. You got to crack that egg. You got to make sure no shell gets in the bowl. Try doing something. You ever tried cutting the grass in the dark? And I don't mean with the ride mower that's got headlights on it. I mean with the old push mower. You're out in the dark trying to, you know how dangerous that is? All those kind of things. Why do we do those things during the day? So we can. That's what Jesus says. So you can see. Now Jesus is talking, even more importantly, he's comparing a physical to spiritual. What do we need to do in our spiritual lives? Turn on the what? The light. What is the light? Well, Jesus has already been referred to this back in the first part of John. The true light came into the world. You want to know? Look to Jesus. And Jesus does that. He's going, if you have spirituality, if you have God, you have light, you can see where you're going. Now, and he's using that physical picture, but he's talking spiritually. But if a man, verse 10, as he says, walketh in the night, he stumbleth. What's the other way that Jesus said that made it so clear, that would apply since he just healed a blind man? We often use the same phrase. It's become part of the culture of America. When someone who doesn't know what they're doing is trying to tell someone who doesn't know what they're doing, what are they doing? The blind leading the blind. And both of them end up what? Falling in the ditch. Why? Neither one of them can see where they're going. That's the same picture that's right here. Jesus in verse 11 says, then we're going on, because our friend Lazarus sleepeth, but I go that I may awake him out of sleep. The disciples hear that and they say, oh, that's good. He's sick. Going to sleep will help him gain. Because what do? When you get a good sickness, you get a good strong cold, what do we all do? You try to take some medicine, you try to find the biggest blankets you can, and you go to that bed and you just sleep. And you wake up feeling better most of the time. You know, my recipe for that is, that's the reason I keep the bottle of NyQuil there. When I feel one like that coming on, the first thing I do is take the NyQuil, get the extra blanket, and go to bed. You might sweat a little bit, you wake up, you feel a lot better. The sleep and all of that works. So they think that's what Jesus is talking about. But look at verse 13. Howbeit Jesus spake of his death, but they thought that he had spoken of taking of rest and sleep. Even then and even today, men have trouble doing what? Separating physical from spiritual. You think about this, I'll go up in context of this. Here is Jesus talking about a man who's asleep, being dead. You think about that in the larger context. What did the Jews look for as the kingdom of God? Oh, you've got to make Israel become the center of the world. We got to have a king that sits on the throne in Jerusalem. Do you still hear that in religion today? Anybody that hears or studies anything that's called premillennialism, big, long word, not going to even try to spell it. Here is somebody that believes there's going to be a literal 1,000-year reign of Jesus sitting on a literal physical throne in Jerusalem, because we can't separate what? The spiritual from the physical. Jesus is trying to get them to do that. Lazarus is asleep. Do we use that euphemism still? If you've got young children, you'll understand this. You know, we often talk about so-and-so who passed away. That's one of our favorite. Or they've gone asleep. And we know that we mean they what? Expired. They died. They've reached termination. You see how many different ways we can think to say it? How do you explain that euphemism to a young child? You want to see that? Get somebody to try to do that one day. They'll go through all kinds of hoops. You know how you explain it to them? They died. Why are we so afraid to say that sometimes? because we often see death as a what? An end. Jesus is making a point here. He's saying Lazarus is only asleep. Notice some important facts about sleeping for a moment. Number one, sleep is temporary. Death is not permanent. Sleep is temporary. Death is not permanent. You ever thought of it that way? That's what it is. Why? How do I know that? Well, we'll talk about it some more. Sleep refreshes and rejuvenates. You go to sleep, you wake up feeling better usually. Oh, does that sound like the resurrection now? A person sleeps from this world, but they go to resurrection and they're going to be what? By the way, who will receive an eternal spiritual body? I like that answer. Everybody. Understand that. Everybody gets an eternal spiritual body. Now, what happens to that body is a whole nother question. But you think about going to sleep from this body that can wear out, and as you get older, you begin to understand the aches and the pains, and you can't get up off the floor as easy. You can't crawl under stuff. You hear it. Neely looks at me sometimes after I sleep. If I sleep a little bit too long, boy, waking up is worse than not sleeping at all at times, because you just get stiff. Takes you an hour to get moving again, and then you're okay. Some point it starts to take 2 hours and then 3 hours, and you can see that whole picture. You go to sleep in this body, you wake up in one that there's no pain in, at least initially. But where does that body go and what happens to it? That's what the resurrection's about. That's what Jesus is talking about. You, that's made in the image of God, that cannot be this physical shell, goes to sleep. It's separated from its human body, that's death, but it comes back, and then that body goes to what? Either reward or punishment. Think about the pain that will be there when it can't ever end, and what that body can endure at that point because of that. Jesus then in verse 14 has to bring them up to speed. He's trying to get them to think about sleep being temporary, about it refreshing, about men coming out from it, and about the rest that it is. But they're over there thinking physically, and so he has to look at them and do the same thing we have to do to a young child sometime. Then Jesus said unto them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Why? Y'all aren't getting it, so here you go. Do we do this a lot in our own lives at times? If you've ever lived in the military, you get used to it. They make lots of suggestions. They'll be having a company picnic for the company you're in, and they will see, it would be good if everyone would be there. Okay? If the man who has on double bars or above says it would be good if everyone would be there, what does that actually mean? You will be there. Unless you're in the base hospital or on an approved leave or TAD, in other words, physically not present, you will be there. Why do they say it'd be good if everybody could be there? Be nice. How many of us would like to go through life? And see, Lucy was on, like I said, this weekend at the house, so there's lots of Lucy in the head right now. Oh, she hated it when Ricky put her on a schedule. But why did he do that? He was trying to get a job. She wasn't ready to go on time. The guy he's trying to get the promotion job from looks at timeliness, because if you're going to be the manager of the club, you need to be what? Anybody here get frustrated at, Walmart's open 24 hours a day now, but before they were, you go to Publix or another store, you get frustrated if you show up because they say we open at 9 and you're there at 9, and by 9:05 you're not in the door. Because you're sitting there going, no, you said you'd be open at 9. You ought to actually unlock that door at 8:55. You want to be proper. You be early. We get really frustrated when people are late. That's the picture that they're saying. And so sometimes we don't like to be given those directed things, do we? We like to have niceties around it. It'd be good if young people, if you haven't gotten this on the hints of your parents yet, if mom says it would be good if you would clean your room, that is actually, I'm going to translate it for you. Go clean your room right now. Not later, not if you feel like it, not that it's some sort, that's exactly what it means, but we put niceties. There are times we try to do that. Jesus did it. God understands humans' thinking. He created humans after all. He's asleep. It's both truthful because it's absolutely true that spiritually he's only what? Asleep. He's going to be raised one day. On the other hand, it's a nicety, but Jesus has to just break all that, look at everybody and just say, he's dead. You now understand. Verse 15 brings up an interesting way of looking at it, because Jesus goes, and I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, to the intent you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go unto him. Then said Thomas, which is called Didymus, unto his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. Now, you see Jesus making the statement that he's glad, but why is he glad? Because he knows what he's going to do when he gets there. And it's going to provide rock solid evidence of who he is. Now, you get some of those that are what do you call them when they're so diehard that, hey, if you're going to go to the place that everybody wants to stone you, I'm going with you. That's Thomas at the moment. Usually it's Peter that does something like that. But here is Thomas, called Didymus. Let us go that we may die with him. Thomas, though, is being cynical about it. Think about that at this point and some of the belief that's associated with this. You ever had somebody reply that way when you have something going on? Oh yeah, let's go. We'll make a great time of it. You know, the military and the same company picnic, the next phrase that usually came out, you will be there and you will have fun. Do you think most of the young 18, 19, 20-year-olds going to the company family picnic with all the families and the kids running around thought that that was, quote, quote, fun? But that's the first sergeant's way. He would send it down to the sergeants who usually had to do it, but that would be the statement. You will be there. You will have fun. In other words, if someone asks you, do you think this picnic was a good thing? You're going to say, sir, yes, sir, could never get better. And you'll do it with a smile on your face. Why? Because it's good for the morale of everyone. And they found out that they would have fun when they would do what? Change the mindset. When you stop saying, I have to go. Does this sound something like when children start with church? Why do I have to go? If you stop saying, I have to go, and say, I get to go, it may not be what was on the top of my plan for the week, but I still get to go. And there's something there that whether it's just because I got a hamburger, and you know how much better a hamburger is that's cooked at a company picnic when they went and bought real food rather than what they serve in the chow hall. I hear somebody understood it. That's the picture. What kind of attitude do we put around it? That's what's being raised. But Thomas shows us, even amongst the 12, the closest friends Jesus had, some of them were still what? Cynical. And so you see that picture. You come to verse 17, we begin the discussion going down through verse 37 of being the resurrection and the life. Here comes the real power of Jesus in the world. It says, then when Jesus came, that is to the place where Lazarus is laid, he found that he had lain in the grave 4 days already. Now Bethany was nigh unto Jerusalem, about 15,000 furlongs off. And many of the Jews came to Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him, but Mary sat still in the house. Then Martha said unto Jesus, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. But I know that even now, whatsoever thou wilt ask of God, God will give it to thee. So you see down through verse 22 now, this picture. Number one fact, Lazarus has been dead how long? 4 days. We're going to see it referenced down here later, but if you go look and you do the study of the human body, what happens after the third day, especially if there's nothing done to preserve that body in any way? Well, we're going to find out it stinks. It really begins to decay. Okay? True decay begins to take place. First day, if you didn't have a temperature gun, sometimes you couldn't tell. In fact, why do people pass away at home if they're older and sometimes people just don't know it? They're laying peacefully in a bed. They've been doing it for the last 3 hours. What's this hour any different? And until somebody goes in and does what, sometimes they don't even know. My dad's brother, I had an uncle, passed away from a heart attack. He got up one morning, went in and sat on the couch, and evidently had the heart attack shortly after sitting down on the couch. My aunt found him 4+ hours later because she'd gotten up, TV was on, he's sitting on the couch. He did that quite often on Saturday morning. She went to fix breakfast, was doing a couple of other things. Finally, the only reason she ever found out, she went in there because he didn't respond when she hollered to come to breakfast. She went in, and when she touched him, she could feel it. Why? Just went that way. Jesus makes sure Lazarus is dead 4 days. Not only is he's had all of it, he's starting to, as we're going to find out, stink. Decay has set in. Tells us an important fact about Bethany. It's close to Jerusalem. And evidently, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus were well known in the Jewish communities because it tells us that many came to them concerning their brother. Now, at verse 20, you see Martha. And if you think about what you know of Mary and Martha, you can see this picture. Martha hears Jesus is coming. She doesn't wait for him to get there. She what? Goes out to meet him. She says, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. Now go back and think about what Jesus had done. He found out Lazarus was sick and that it was a very serious illness, and he stayed where he was. How long? 2 days. That implies it's about a 2-day journey back home, or at least a day. In other words, it took somebody maybe a day to get out with the word. Jesus stayed where he was 2 days and another day back because Lazarus has been dead 4 days. So you see, Jesus, 2 days, he's already doing that. He's already explained to them about sleep. He's had to go into death. Then he told them, remember at verse 15, I'm glad for your sakes. If Lazarus has been dead 4 days and he's able to come back to life, what would be the only thing that would be more amazing? Take somebody's bones and let them come back to life. Because there's no difference at that point, is there? That's the reason he waited that length of time. That's the reason he's glad. You're going to see the real power of God now. God could not only take, say, a child who had died, the widow's son, the young girl, daughter of Jairus, who is maybe just died, and bring them back to life. God can take one who has reached the 4th day, decay has set in. The only thing that would make it more amazing is if you waited a little bit longer and let the body decay so all we had was a couple of bones left, God can still what? Bring it back to life. If God can do that with a temporary body, what can he do for eternity with the spiritual body? This is Jesus getting ready to show the true power of the resurrection. Martha, though, if you'd been here, he wouldn't have died, and Jesus knows that. Look at this, verse 23. Jesus says unto her, thy brother shall rise again. Now, some people say they'd had no concept of the resurrection prior to Christianity coming on in Acts 2, and it begins to be preached. Look at what Martha says, and think about where Martha would have gotten her information. Martha said unto him, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Did they already understand there's going to be a day when everyone rises? Absolutely. Jesus uses that very thing and says, and you see a great confession from him. Here's another one of the I ams. Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And he shows that connection that crosses over between the physical and the spiritual. Yes, a man may be spiritually dead, but if he is in me, he's going to be, or physically dead, but he'll be spiritually alive. And that's where we'll have to let it go this morning. We'll pick up on Wednesday night at verse 25 again.